order to understand the Trinity, let's dissect it a little bit. Now, all three of these entities are said to be omnipresent, meaning that they are everywhere at once. But Jesus Christ...
Now, to see the problem. What is actually omnipresent regarding God? His being. So the persons partaking of that being can partake of omnipresence. And the argument here is going to be if there becomes a localization of the Son, specifically, is what the argument's going to be. I mean, I'm assuming this. I didn't listen to this. But my assumption is that the argument's going to be, how can Jesus be God? Because Jesus lived on earth, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it is interesting that there's a textual variant in John 13:13, I believe, off the top of my head, where the Son of Man on earth speaks about the Son of Man who is in heaven. And so there is some interesting discussion as to the continuing reality of the Son's omnipresence, despite there being what we would refer to as a localization or a focus in regards to the person on earth. And I could definitely see how that would work. So, but at the same time, there is a regular recognition that God does have the ability to withdraw his presence of fellowship, withdraw his presence of comfort, withdraw his presence in the punishment of the wicked. There's all sorts of language like that has to be allowed to speak to a full doctrine of biblical omnipresence and what that would require in each instance.
It says in the book of John chapter 8 verse 40 that here I am a man in front of you and you're looking for a way to kill me. So
what translation is this? This looks like a really... But yes, Jesus says I am a man because we believe that. The Word became flesh. Halagos sarx again. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. John chapter 1 verse 14. So as I expected, the idea is if there is a localization, if in other words, the second person of the Trinity, who was directly involved in the creation of human nature in the first place, takes on a perfect human nature, that this somehow is contradictory to God's omnipresence. It is not, obviously, but that's what I sort of expected.
Christ is saying that he is a man whom is bound by flesh. However, Christian missionaries would argue that once Jesus...
Uh-oh. Look at that. What does that guy look like? Look, it's Elder Young. Well, it can't be Elder Young because he's got a cross on his Bible. So there you go. So I'm not sure why there's a name tag there because that really makes him look like a Mormon. But Mormons aren't going to have a cross on anything because... And besides that, Mormons are polytheists too, so...
Christ died upon the cross. He turned into a spiritual being, and therefore he is omnipresent.
Whoa! A little more heresy here, that when Jesus died upon a cross, he became a spiritual being? Is that what was just said? Hold on a second here. That was in between things. Let's back it up.
Jesus Christ died upon the cross. He turned into a spiritual being, and therefore he is omnipresent.
Okay, back it to up a little.
However, Christian missionaries would argue that once Jesus Christ died upon the cross, he turned into a spiritual being, and therefore he is omnipresent.
Okay, no. That would be a confusion with Jehovah's Witnesses, maybe? I'm not sure what this guy may have had a very interesting experience. I don't know who he is. Sorry, I'm trying to be respectful and kind, and truthful at the same time. I hope you hear that. But where did you get this? The Jehovah's Witnesses deny the physical resurrection of Jesus. They do not believe, they believe his body was removed from the tomb, but then it's either on display someplace in the universe or was dissolved in the gases, but he was turned into a life-giving spirit. But they don't understand the meaning of the Greek term anastasis, resurrection. It's that which died coming to life again. And so, no, the whole idea, the problem with your thesis here is that you're assuming that to possess a body of flesh and bone means automatically that you are limited in the sense that the Son can't take on that human flesh without ceasing to be God. We're talking about the Son who has eternally existed, who is omnipresent, not the human nature of Jesus. There are some Christians, and I won't defend this, I'm just letting you know this so that if you run into it, and you guys have different viewpoints on a bunch of different things, all sorts of different understandings, even of God's hands and things like that, have appeared throughout the history of Islam. So realize this on your side as well. But there are some who believe in the ubiquity of the body of Jesus, that there is in essence, a transfer of attributes from the divine to the human, so that Jesus's body is technically ubiquitous, or in a sense omnipresent, and this underlies some people's idea of the presence of Christ in the Eucharistic bread, that he exists above, under, and around the Eucharistic bread. So you may run into someone like that. It's not overly likely, possible, but that's certainly not been the widely held historical view.
Ever ask yourself as to what the differentiation between us and him is then? Because when we die, our spirits are also let free, and therefore, according to their definition, we would also be omnipresent.
No. Okay, so you're dealing with, first of all, a inappropriate heretical understanding, and secondly, being spiritual does not make you omnipresent. There are all sorts of spiritual beings that God has created that are not omnipresent. That is an attribute of the Creator who transcends creation. So, because when we die, our spiritual also set free. I assume this means the spirit leaves the body and therefore we become omnipresent or something. This doesn't have anything really to do with biblical Christianity or historic Christianity or Orthodox Christianity or any other kind of Christianity.
But the other 2 points are slightly less unambiguous and less philosophical. Now, all 3 of these entities are said to be all-knowing.
You know what's coming, right? I hope you know what's coming. If you've done almost any study whatsoever, what we're going to get now is no man knows the day or the hour. You're going to have the question of the Incarnation. It's a shame that our Muslim friends don't recognize the 2 categories of dealing with, because we say that God has been triune from the beginning, but they focus their attention primarily upon a issue they don't see as the same, they don't recognize as different, and that is the Incarnation. The nature of the Incarnation, the voluntary self-humbling of the Son, Philippians chapter 2, for example. He made himself, he humbled himself, becoming obedient to death, even death on the cross, and making himself a servant. And that's what he did. And so there are certain aspects of his glorious nature that for a season are laid aside, hidden, masked, however, whatever terms you want to use, so that he can function as the Father, Son, and Spirit intends the Messiah to be and bring about our redemption and doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. So, but that's an objection against the Incarnation. It's not really an objection against the Trinity. It would be helpful if you all recognized what those differences were.
Jesus Christ, peace and blessings be upon him, says in the book of Matthew, chapter 24, verse 36, that of the final day and hour knows no one, not the angels in heaven, nor the Son, but only the Father.
And once again, we've gone over this a number of times before, but let me just point out, the Muslim does not believe Jesus ever said this. They'll say, it doesn't matter, it's your Bible, so we'll use it. Okay, fine, but you don't believe Jesus ever said this. Because the Son here, you don't believe that Jesus ever referred to himself as the Son in this way. Because this is unique. This places the Son above the angels in heaven. And so that idea, which is all through the New Testament, is rejected by the author of the Quran. Now, why he objects to it, what he thinks sonship implies, that's a different issue. That's an important issue because I think the author of the Quran was incorrect about that. Is incorrect in his understanding of what Christians believed about that particular subject. But once again, we have a situation here where the Son lays aside the exercise of certain divine prerogatives, and for some reason, the knowledge of that day and hour is seen by the Father, Son, and Spirit together to be something that would be inappropriate for the Messiah to possess during the time of the incarnation and his ministry. And so, does the Son know today? Assuredly. The resurrected Son most definitely does. But he's speaking as the incarnate one. And it also emphasizes that it is the Father's authority that has set that specific time. That is, that the very fabric of time itself, when these things are going to take place, is all the result of the Father's will that then becomes the fount of everything in Ephesians chapter 1, if you take a look at what is said there.
Therefore, he is defining that the Son himself, who is himself, does not have all the knowledge. And even if you ask Christian missionaries, okay, but is the Son still Jesus Christ? They would define yes, because all three of these personalities are separate from one another. But here, the Son himself is defining that he doesn't have all the knowledge. The final point being that they are all powerful. Now, if you read the book of John, chapter 5, verse 30, Jesus Christ, peace and blessings be upon him, says that out of my own self I can do nothing. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is just, because I seek not to please myself, but only him who had sent me. Therefore, he is defining that out of his own power, he can do nothing.
I'm not sure why, again, what translation this is or anything like that. You can see now why we have in the past done entire programs just on John chapter 5. I've lost track of how many of those that we've done, where we have walked through the text and demonstrated that the emphasis in John chapter 5, remember, starting in verses 17 and 18, is the fact that Jesus healed on the Sabbath day. And when the Jews objected to this, his answer was, my Father's working until now, and I am working. The Jews understood that God continued to uphold the universe even on the Sabbath day. They had two different ways of understanding that. Either he just wasn't subject to the Sabbath rule, or if he was subject to the Sabbath rule, that all the universe is his house, and therefore you could move around your house all you wanted. It wasn't counted against your steps for that day on the Sabbath, which is an interesting way of looking at things. But be it as it may, the point is that Jesus' claim resulted in the Jews seeking all the more to kill him, because he not only was loosing the Sabbath, but he was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God. And so that's what 5:18 says. 5:19 and following then lays out the relationship of the Father and the Son. And so while they are distinguished from one another, the Son plainly says he is sent by the Father. He speaks the words of the Father. He does the will of the Father. He also says the Son has been given to have life within himself, that he raises the dead, and that all are to honor the Son even as they honor the Father, none of which does any Muslim believe, which is the big problem. That's the big problem right there, is no Muslim actually believes that to be true. What John chapter 5 is talking about is the perfect union that exists between the Father and the Son. Jesus is not some separate deity out trying to get followers just for himself. He is doing the will of the Father so that all would honor him even as they honor the Father. That's what John chapter 5 is teaching. And so the question I have for my Muslim friends is, do you honor the Son even as you honor the Father? You don't. You're precluded from doing so. Do you have any reason for believing that the author of the Quran had ever read these words in John chapter 5? Because I don't. I don't. I've read the Quran many times. I've read Bukhari and Muslim and portions of Jamia Tirmidhi and lots of sources, honestly looking for anything that would give me a reason to believe that the author of the Quran had ever heard these words, had ever heard what we're going to read in John chapter 8 later on, or John chapter 5 or whatever. I don't see any evidence that he did. There's certainly no attempt to argue against these things. Let's just put it that way. I think that's an important thing to consider.